and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast that brings together business leaders, entrepreneurs, and experts covering a range of topics. I'm Nicholas Barton, founder and CEO of the Barton Partnership, an award-winning executive recruitment and consulting solutions firm providing permanent search and independent consulting services across strategy, sustainability and M&A, data and analytics, and transformation and change. I am delighted to be launching our new series celebrating inspiring female career stories with our first guest, Rakhi Williams. Rakhi has had an impressive career over the past 20 years as a strategy executive working with global blue-chip organizations and leading high-performing teams around the world. So, Rakhi, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you on this podcast. Let's start at the very beginning then. So, first question, can you tell us about your career journey to date? Tell us about your life so far.
Well, I kind of took a little bit of a detour in my career journey early on. So initially, I was supposed to be a doctor. My parents are both doctors. All my grandparents are doctors. Everyone in my life is a doctor. That was important to me when I was being raised. And I made a last-minute decision as I was double majoring in college to go into finance. There are a lot of reasons for that, too many to explain. But overall, I was good with numbers. I had a strong interest in finance. I didn't want to study for 10 years to become a doctor. And so I went into corporate finance straight from when I graduated university. I did that for 3 years as an analyst, so kind of paid my dues in finance. And while I was doing that, I think I've always been a curious person and I've always wanted to challenge myself every time I do a role. And so I tried to find ways of sort of, I guess, increasing the burden of learning while I was working. And so I pursued the CFA program, the Chartered Financial Analyst program, which was, a pretty tough program while you're working. So I did level 1 and level 2 of that, which were, it was fantastic. Sort of backdrop to learning finance. And then in my second year, after finishing my second year as an analyst, I applied to business school. So initially I was working in finance. I was working in media and telecoms and project finance. And then I applied to business school, having done 2.5 years. And it's kind of the way in America. I grew up in the US, and in the US, it's a pretty common path to take to go on do an MBA in between, having worked for a while. So I when I was in business school, I thought, okay, let's find a new challenge again. How am I going to expand my horizons? And so I did 3 programs that brought me outside of the US. The first one was to work for my summer internship. I did a dual summer internship. I did 2 months on Wall Street at Merrill Lynch in M&A. And then the second one I did 2 months in Vietnam, living in a combination of Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, working for Lucent Technologies when they were quite a big power in telecoms. And I did their entry strategy into the country.
Wow.
So the plan for the operating team. That was really a great experience. That then led me to take my winter break, and then I went to go work for a cooperation in India, in Bangalore, between McKinsey and Ashoka. Ashoka is the nonprofit NGO. Basically, I camped out in the Western Ghats rainforest for 8 weeks and helped the local tribes create cooperatives around their local goods. So that basically was an environmental push to stop poaching.
Wow.
In that area. So, it's where tigers live and some species that really need that habitat to be sustainable. So I did that. And then as soon as I finished that program, I went to ESA for an exchange program for 5 months. It was an interesting time. It was like literally 2000, the introduction of the euro currency. I remember it well. And I went there really to live in Barcelona because it's a fantastic city. I think it's one of the best cities in the world. And the other reason I went there was to really learn about case studies outside of Harvard Business School. Because, the MBA program, really, they cover Harvard Business School case studies. That's the main emphasis, the main focus. And I wanted to, learn about new experiences, new companies and how they attack strategic problems. And also I wanted to learn a bit of Spanish. I hadn't learned any Spanish. So that was quite nice. And then basically while I was doing all of these sort of programs abroad, I had to choose a job. And so this was now, if you remember, it's 2000, 2001, the dot-com crash.
Yeah.
And so it was a pretty miserable time to be trying to look for a job when you're coming out of an MBA program. So I had a number of offers from some of the big consulting firms rescinded because they just decided they couldn't really take on a new consulting class. But still, I decided to pursue. I guess I didn't really mention the reason I chose to move into consulting is because I enjoyed the Lucent experience so much. So I'd done I'd done so much finance, but I really enjoyed working in a corporate advisory, working for, helping clients solve problems. And so I decided that I would come and work for LEK and that I would do it in London. Long story short. So I only looked at San Francisco, which was, to be honest, a bit of a graveyard at that time with the dot-com crash. Yes, and then I looked at London, and London LEK was a great fit for me because I was a numbers person and they do a lot of, PE work and M&A work. And that was my background. They wanted me, and the work that they were doing seemed really relevant to my skill set. So I worked mainly for media and retail clients. Interestingly, that was the time, that was in 2001 to 2003. And that is when Tesco was in its heyday. And they were doing amazing things, like they had just developed, they were kind of perfecting their ready meal product, and they were doing things like introducing all sorts of new formats. So they were going between hypermarkets to Tesco Express and everything in between in terms of size. And they were introducing value, finest, all the different categories of grocery. And I didn't think grocery could be sexy. I thought this is super interesting because in the US, it's a really sleepy industry. Retail generally, those were the days of Kmart and Sears and JCPenney. And in the grocery stores, the offering was really poor and not consumer thinking or forward thinking at all. And so I just had this thing in my head that this is a simple business model. And it's something I really enjoy. I enjoy thinking about FMCG and consumer. And this is a company that's in its prime. Yeah. And so I made it my mission to get a job there.
This is where you and I first crossed paths many moons ago. But
yeah, I think we talked just before I joined LEK. So that was probably about 2002. Yeah. You were at Asbury Marsden and you were trying to recruit me for something else. I can't remember exactly what role it was, but you called me. I remember. It was a cold call. And good friends ever since.
Exactly. But Tesco were, as you say, at the time, really on a huge drive to recruit a lot of strategic talent into the business, into different areas.
Yeah, I was one of the first. So they had hired a guy called Michael Fleming, who was head of their Asia business. He was expanding Asia. Well, he's head of sort of business development of Asia, growing the Asia business. And then they had hired John Browett, who was head of Tesco.com at the time. And they had hired Laura Wade-Geary, who was, I think initially she was the marketing director. And when I joined, she was head of strategy, group strategy director and M&A business development. Right. And so, yeah, I think they were the first layer of that kind of talent coming in. And then they started looking towards all the consulting firms. And most of the consulting firms tended to have people who had MBAs. So there was a combination sort of MBA consultant credentials coming into Tesco, quite a few of them actually. So yeah, it was quite large numbers starting to come in and really change the talent base and the culture. Basically, my remit was a third of it was group strategy. So helping them with their 5-year plan and kind of refreshing it every year and running the board strategy conference. So that was basically, that was a new thing for them where they would take the board offsite for 3 days, the non-executive directors, and they would talk strategy. So that was a new thing I think that Laura introduced. And it was all about the future. It was taking 3 days out, looking at the plan, the growth plan, the 5-year plan, and saying, how do we deliver this plan? What are the future levers that we're going to pull to grow a business? And that's, I think, where Tesco was really unique because it was so forward thinking and it thought of itself as a brand and not a retailer. It thought of itself as a brand and it thought about industries as the ones that it seemed attractive to Tesco were the ones that needed to be consumerized or sort of demystified for consumers. So they didn't think of themselves as, they never worried about not being a financial services company or a telecoms company. They just thought of themselves as a brand that could go in with a partner in those sectors and conquer because those sectors hadn't evolved fast enough to suit what was happening in the industry. They were kind of changing and being disrupted, and consumers needed more. Tesco's always been about the customer first. Right? It is so customer obsessed. And so it became everything, all the new businesses became a brand extension. So yeah, I looked at group strategy, but my main, probably 2/3 of what I did was M&A, new market entry, and joint ventures. Okay. So Tesco expanded. I was there during the greatest years of expansion when we moved into the US, all over Asia. We did so many deals in Central Europe. We put Tesco flags pretty much all over the world.
So you left Tesco then in 2006 and joined HIT Entertainment.
Yeah, I left Tesco because at that point in life, I had started my family, had small children, and I had been traveling pretty much most of my time at Tesco, pretty significantly, long stints away. And these were long haul travel. So this was, to India and China and the US pretty frequently. And also, it was a pretty long journey for me from London to Hertfordshire. So I had been headhunted. I hadn't actually planned to leave. Apax approached me. And as I mentioned, I used to do media before, and they came to me with a new deal that they were working on. And they asked me to join as part of the senior management team to be VP of commercial development to help grow the business. They had a huge ambition to double the business in 3 years. And so they asked me to come in and basically lead, new market entry strategy and M&A.
You were there for a couple of years.
Yeah. So I left HIT because, the financial crisis happened and sort of like opportunities to kind of progress disappeared because the business was a bit stagnant. And so I then had, at that stage, 3 children under 4.
Right.
Consulting. So that was a really good time to consult. And then I decided that I needed to get back into the corporate world. And the rest of the story of my career has been pretty much the same, which is I meet a CEO. We have great chemistry. They decide they want me to be their partner, their sort of right hand. And that's basically the journey I've taken for the last 10, 11 years. Yeah. So Dave Levin was the first. He was the CEO of UBM. And UBM had he had been already there for 5 years. And the first 5 years of his career there had been about really taking a business that had a huge number of subscale businesses and trying to make sense of them and organizing them into a way that there was some meaning and a strategy behind them. So he the way he said it to me when I joined was he had the right pieces on the chessboard. He just didn't know how to play. Now he needed to kind of create the right match, the right game from those pieces. And so he and I spent 5 years working together, 4.5 years working together. He left before I did. We spent that time transforming UBM into an events first business. So when I joined UBM's events business, it was probably a quarter of what they did. And they had a big data business, and they had an online business and a marketing services business. And we moved away from all of those, divested a number of assets, moved out of print, digitalized the print business, and went long on events.
And then you moved to Hive Group, but Hive wasn't the name of the company that you joined, was it? It rebranded during your time there.
At UBM, I then moved to the US business to run the media part of the tech business in California. And so I commuted for 2 years while I was at UBM, and that was a pretty difficult thing to do. And at the end of that, I was asked to move to the US. And even though I'm American, my husband and my children at the time weren't on board. My husband's career was going really well. So we decided to stay in the UK. And shortly after making that decision, I met Mark Shashua, who was part of the original founding family of what was called ITE Group. So ITE was an emerging markets focused exhibitions business founded, I think, in the early 80s. It was taken public, I guess, in the late 90s. And then the Shashua family exited. And that business did fantastically well, riding the growth wave of the emerging markets. And then in about, 2011, 12, the emerging markets had kind of emerged, the growth had slowed, and the strategy hadn't evolved to kind of anticipate that. And then there were a number of macroeconomic shocks in the core markets that IT was in. And so that put the business into a negative spiral. And so when I joined the business, I was asked to join to lead the strategy and transformation of what was IT Group, a very, very much Russian-focused business. It was at 11% decline per annum which meant, effectively it was terminal. And so Mark and myself and another leader called Andy Beach, who was the CFO, came in as a triage to completely transform the business over 3 years, which we did pretty successfully.
Great story. Great story. And then finally, you've just completed a stint with Global Data now, which you've really been for the last 10 months. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that story with us. Let's move on though, because clearly what we're also keen to explore is your experience as a female leader, as a woman in business and in industry, especially as you say during that time having raised 3 children as well, and managing a family household. What lessons and experiences can you share as a female leader with our audience?
I mean, for me, it's never been a choice to work or not work. It's been a mission to work. So I never, ever contemplated not working. And I think, throughout life, one of the things I would say is that everyone faces crossroads, right? There's these moments where you either have to go right or left, right? And careers are a bit like that. And I think many people find that the balancing of family and professional life is really difficult. And it is. I mean, that's just a given. It is just really, really hard. Many people argue it's the saying, you can never do everything right. You'll always be, you probably won't be as good at your job, and you probably won't be a great parent. But actually, it depends, I think, on the person. And for me, what I would say is that I have never wobbled. And I would encourage, as a lesson, I would encourage people who are listening, try not to wobble, because at the end of the day, we all wobble, but it's giving into the wobble. I think that's the thing that then, puts you on a different course. And for me, I just never, ever, ever considered not taking my career forward. And it's not because, I didn't find it challenging like everybody else. It's more because for me, I always worried about not being able to get back onto the career ladder. I had this tension that I just thought, if I give up and take time out, what will happen? And also, I also really wanted to be an inspiration to my 2 daughters. One of the reasons that I am who I am is because my mom's a doctor, and a really successful one, who was a wonderful role model for me. No matter how tough things got balancing her professional life and her personal life, she never wavered. In all of her time working, she never missed a day of work, for illness, for us, for anything. And I mean, it's an amazing story because she didn't really have anyone to fall back on, because she immigrated from India. And so she moved to the US, having no family at all. And she made a real success of having 3 girls and an amazing career. And so for me, that was something for me that I always aspired to have as well. And so I guess there was that vision for me from, an early age that was what I was going to do. But then, of course, when you're trying to execute, that's where you start to face all the challenges, right? And so for me, I so many times found it very difficult. But I guess the interesting thing is, I obviously didn't choose a very easy path, because I left my home country in a similar fashion to my mom and set up again. And I have no family support in London. I mean, I have my husband's parents who live a few hours away, so they've never been very close, and quickly became of an age where they, couldn't really support us with the children. So I think you become quite resilient when you do both, when you work and you parent and look after your family. And I think that you build fantastic multitasking skills. And I think none of us are perfect at it, right? But we all just try. But I also think that, there's no perfect scenario. And I would say that anyone who aspires to create, the perfect family and the perfect career is probably not going to be a very happy person. But I think if you do your best, which is what I've always tried to do, I try to do the best I can for my kids, try to do the best I can at my job. And I give as much as I can, to both. You sort of get appreciated from both sides. I think my kids really appreciate what I try to do for them. They see the benefits of me working and the kind of family life that we have. And they know that they're still my top priority.
That's amazing. Thank you. What was your support system as you advanced in your career? So what mentors or role models did you have? Firstly,
I think I mentioned I had my 2 parents who, they were fantastic role models because they both worked in very high pressured environments. My dad was a surgeon. and my mom was a pathologist. And, they had very serious careers, make a mistake, you get sued for malpractice, especially in a litigious country like America. And they didn't have any family support. But you know what? They never once acted like it was hard. Their mental focus on being able to do both and just, ignoring the obstacles almost, pretending they weren't there. They very much had a can-do, super positive attitude to living and working and creating a life. I've always not really had strong delineation between work and family. And some people think that's strange and you need to have more work-life balance. Actually, for me, having a job that fits with my life, that doesn't feel like work because I love it, and therefore can sort of, move between family and work quite seamlessly, has always really worked for me. My job sometimes comes home with me, but my kids understand that, and they actually like to get involved and, like to hear about it. And so I think there's a mentality thing. And my parents gave me that. So they gave me this kind of, there are no boundaries. You can do anything. You can achieve anything. And they did it during a time where a lot of women weren't working. When I was in school, most of my classmates in my school had parents who had they had families where the mom was at home, most of them. Mm. And so that was a real inspiration. Since then, I went to an all-girls school growing up, and I had some fantastic teachers, and my teachers tried to instill in me a mentality that there were no ceilings for me and that I could do whatever I set my mind to do. And that really stuck with me. So I never saw situations where I didn't think I could achieve things. I always saw opportunities and I just went for them. So for me, there were never constraints, but that's, again, a mental thing. I never believed that there was something I couldn't achieve if I put my heart and mind to it.
And who from a professional point of view, who from a career point of view inspired you?
Professional point of view, I didn't really, so I worked in finance, and in finance there were very few women. So I had some, important bosses who really looked after me. So when I did my first analyst job, my boss and sort of the number two in the team were huge supporters of mine. And they, supported me do my MBA. They sponsored my CFA program. And they took a real interest in training and supporting me. And they were, two guys who I really looked up to. When I left, I wouldn't say there were sort of any specific role models that I remember at Tuck. But since then, I had, there were some really great female role models for me at Tesco who inspired me and made me, and kind of paved the way, I think, for women to do great things at Tesco. Because I think, again, when I was there, it was early days. There were more and more women taking greater leadership roles. And then I think I was, when I left Tesco, I was in my early 30s. And I think that's when I felt serious enough that I could actually get a proper mentor, right? So when I went to UVM, well, actually, in between even Eden McCallum, I would say Dina and Leanne were huge advocates and supports for me because they really wanted women to be able to succeed in the workplace, when they were in the stage that I was in, which was, having children and still wanting to work. And I think that was their whole model was based on initially was to empower women to be able to go back and do that. David Levin is a fantastic supporter of diversity and gender equality. I've not worked for a CEO who really embraced that as much as David did and created a culture where women really felt like they could get into the most senior roles on an equal basis to men. And that culture felt really level. It felt like a level playing field. And that really comes down to also another woman who was the chief people officer. And I think chief people officers have they contribute hugely to the talent agenda and the culture. And that's Jenny Duvalier. She was the chief people officer and she became a huge supporter of me. And I would say, definitely a mentor, sort of unformalized. And then I had another formal mentor, which was Henry Elkington, who I think, having had daughters who were very intelligent and wanting to support them, became a real supporter of a lot of women in our organization. And then after that, I then actually, when I left UBM, actually went out and sought out getting a mentor. And I sought out a mentor who had done something similar to me, which was left consulting, gone into corporate. And that was Wendy Becker, who had been the CEO of Jack Wills, Carphone Warehouse. She had been the first executive board member of Vodafone as the chief marketing officer. I literally approached her. We met through the Tuck Alumni Network. She didn't go to Tuck, but she went to Dartmouth. And we just really hit it off. And I asked her if she would support me. and kind of, just be someone that I could talk to about my career and how I could progress it. And so we did that and actually ended up working together briefly because I did a consulting piece of work for her. And then after that, people have taken, I think that the interesting thing that I would say, the lesson that I've learned from mentors and role models is that sometimes people, I think generally are a bit timid and shy to ask for help and to ask for mentors to take an active role in their career. But what I learned is that people really enjoy doing it. There is a natural human tendency to want to help people. If you find the right person, they will have a vested interest in you. Because sometimes you can find, a mentor situation where there's sort of you might feel like there's more of a competitive angle. But I think if you find the right person, then they really do help. They really do feed off your success. And I think the good thing about finding a really good mentor is that helps you become a good mentor for someone else, right? And you've got to continue that karma.
So are you now mentoring others? Have you taken on?
And it's not been something that I have planned. I just do it naturally because I love giving back. So I do it in all sorts of, I do it in many different ways, really. So I do it for, underadvantaged children, high school students who are looking to get onto the career ladder. I do it for, women in my business school who are still studying their MBAs. I've done it for women who've been in my university. I have done it. I've been asked to do it in the companies I've worked for. So I think Tesco had a mentorship program in which I got involved with some of the more junior staff. And then I did it also for you at UBM formally. And then I was starting a women's network at Global Data before I left, where we were going to be doing some of that. And at Hive, I actually, funny enough, was approached. I think what I like about the mentorship experiences that I've had is that people have felt comfortable enough to approach me to be their mentor. So I've had women just come to me and say, look, I'd really love you to be my mentor. Can you do that? And I actually had another woman do it at HIT. So flattering. And it's just a really nice way to give back to people, especially in the company when you're trying to grow the talent. I think every senior leader has a responsibility to contribute to growing the talent base in that organization and actually supporting the women in that talent base.
That's fantastic. Could you share some observations around advancing to leadership as a working mother? Were there any standout initiatives that have particularly been effective for you during your career?
For me, what I would say is that the government initiatives have really helped me. As a parent, they've probably helped my husband equally. So it's probably not focused on women, except for the maternity leave part of it. So, in the UK, I think there's an outstanding provision for maternity leave. And the fact that your job is guaranteed, I think is a huge help to working women, especially as you're kind of climbing the career ladder and having children at the same time. I would also say that the parental leave options just keep getting better, and that's available to both parents, right? So I think when I started working, it was maybe you could have the option of taking maybe 2 months, maybe 3 a year. Maybe it was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a good amount of weeks you could take per year per child. And so if you only had, I think back then when I first started having kids, I think it was only a guaranteed statutory big, holiday entitlement was 20 days a year. Maybe it was 25, it moved to 25, but you could take a lot more through parental leave if your organization supported that. And so I always worked in companies that supported that. So that was a really good benefit, I think, because it just meant that, you could take maybe an extra week at Christmas or summer or during the half terms. But what I've seen, and I think that the way that it works well is when the tone is set from the top with the CEO. And I think basically when you're in a leadership position, the CEO, if he really values you, he will make a provision for you to work flexibly. And that's what I've seen work really well. So in a number of my competitors where I've seen women working and advancing and doing really well when they're having children is when they get a provision to work maybe a 4-day week. So I've seen that, I've always been B2B media, and I've seen that in Informa. I saw that at UBM when I was working there. I've seen it really work well at The Economist, at Essential. So there are companies, and I think they're led by forward-thinking CEOs that make a real effort to retain women, especially the ones that they think are rising stars. So that's worked really, really well.
Thank you. What should businesses in male-dominated industries be doing to create a more diverse workforce and leadership team?
I mean, I think the only way companies that have minority populations of diversity, whether it's women or people from different ethnicities, is to be very deliberate about it. So you actually, again, it has to come from the top, I think, from the board level, C-suite level. And it has to be deliberate in the sense that it's very focused with clear targets and milestones, and effectively putting in quotas, which you'll hear a lot about, right now with the way the boards are working and FTSE 100s are setting quotas for the number of women that should be on boards. Well, I think companies that need to increase their diversity in terms of having more women need to be very deliberate about having clear KPIs that they measure over time to recruit women. So if I were trying to diversify these talent pools, I'd be looking at recruitment KPIs, retention KPIs, promotion KPIs, with a mindset really focused on diversity. And again, if it's set from the top, it flows downwards. And then, management, all levels will start to follow it. So I think that's the only way. And these kind of transformations and talent pools take time.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared for a 3 to 5 year horizon if you really want to make visible progress.
What are some of the strategies that can help women achieve more prominent positions in these industries?
Well, look, so I can speak about this firsthand because having worked in data and analytics for a number of years, I can tell you that industry is very male dominated. And I think the only thing that women can do to rise, I guess, in those industries is to have a really strong mentality to challenge and to be a bit of a maverick and to be a bit fearless and have the courage to be comfortable being a minority for, who knows how long. It takes a long time, as I said, for these companies to change. And you have to be the instigator of that. You have to be comfortable going in as a woman and wanting to gradually change the way people think. And I think it means going out on a limb and being comfortable being a fish out of water while you're working. And you need to be very proactive about setting a new tone in the organization and educating people about diversity and how important it is in the workplace. And I think gradually people will come around. The best example I can think of is I remember Caroline, I've forgotten her surname, the CEO she was the CEO of EasyJet. I think she's now the CEO of ITV. She came out of, she was not an airline expert or veteran by any means. She never worked in the airline industry. And when she came, I think everyone predicted her failure because it's a very male-dominated industry. And actually, the CEO of Ryanair said that after she left the industry, he said that she actually improved the quality of the industry. And he I quote, he said, I completely underestimated her. And she made me work harder to make my company better. And I think she did a really good job of setting a new tone in her organization and diversifying EasyJet. But look, she went out on a limb, exactly like I said. And in my experience, having gone into data and analytics businesses, I've completely gone out on a limb. In the last company I worked for, there were 10 people on the executive team and there were 2 women. So, it's a pretty low ratio. But in terms of the super senior leadership of women, there were, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 in the whole company of an organization of almost 4,000 people. So you have to go in and sort of not be daunted by that. And then you have to go in also with a mindset to change it. And it takes time. And you'll get beaten up, and you just have to be prepared for that and be in it for the long haul, I guess.
Who are some other examples right now that you see in industry in terms of senior female leaders that are having a positive impact on this?
Well, I know that Laura Boro has recently taken over as CEO of The Economist. And she has set a mandate that she will create a 50-50% split between men and women in the workplace. So she will, as she hires, that is her KPI, which is to me extraordinary. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I saw was that Goldman Sachs said that they would only do IPOs for companies that had a 50-50 non-executive board. I don't remember when they said that would start, but it's imminent. So to me, that's really, dropping the gauntlet down on diversity amongst women in the workplace. There's 7 or 8 FTSE 100 CEOs right now that are women. And that's a higher number than it's been before. And I think in all of those companies, I've read a lot about those women, from the woman who's running Glaxo to the woman who's running Severn Trent. And I think they are pushing really hard to create equal opportunity in the companies that they lead. So you'll see that from, when the woman takes over. I know that Future PLC has a phenomenal female CEO who's been she's delivered phenomenal results. And she's also got a pretty diverse exec team. And I think is definitely setting the standards for a more diverse workplace.
Thank you. Okay, final question then. So what advice would you give the next generation of women starting their careers in strategy?
Well, firstly, I think strategy is a brilliant place to begin your career as a woman. So I feel like strategy is one place where actually, from my experience, the diversity is much stronger between men and women. I mean, there's a lot of women in strategy. So I don't feel that, women starting their career in that sector will feel that that much of a minority, because actually it's changed. It's become much more diverse. And so I think it's a great place to start. But I think the thing that's hard is breaking out of strategy. So when women leave strategy to go into more commercial roles, that's when it gets tricky. So it's funny because I've heard the same thing from men and women, both trying to break out of strategy. And I guess women have more of a burden. I'll explain why. So both men and women, I think, find the good thing about strategy, even though it can have long hours, is you got a really clear expectation of what you're supposed to do. And it works in peaks and troughs, right? So you might have, if you're working for a consulting firm, you might have a really tough caseload. It peaks, and then hopefully the next one won't be so bad and you'll have a bit of a trough. And same thing in corporate strategy. You might be working on a deal or a project in a company that's really difficult, and then hopefully that dies down and you kind of get some time back. But I think the thing that I've heard from people leaving strategy, and as I said, it's both men and women, is that when you go into commercial roles, they kind of you can never shut off. So, you sometimes have to work. If your business operates over the weekend, you have to work over the weekend. I know that's particularly a problem for women going into commercial roles in retail. And I think, you do have to travel a lot. The world is global pre-COVID, and it will go back. Most multinational companies, if you take a commercial role in those companies, you have to travel frequently. And that's a normal expectation, and that's difficult. And so women have a harder time, I think, because, just logistically, they take on more of the carer role, even if they're working. I mean, if you read anything about what's been happening with COVID now, I mean, more women have dropped out of the workforce globally than ever before because of the burden of homeschooling and having to take care of children at home. And so that, that will go back to them having the same kind of problem when they're back to work. And I think what that means is that you have to find a really good support network. So we talked about support networks, I think, in some of your earlier questions.
Yeah.
And so my strategy has always been to have a backup plan. So I can't remember if we talked about this, but I always had 2 nannies, because if one was ill, and I know it's an expensive strategy, by the way, then the other would take over. And also it meant that if I had to work long hours, they could split the day. So I wasn't killing one person, but I had 2 people. And so they felt a lot more valued, and they had a much better work-life balance by having 2 of them. And look, in the early years when I wasn't making much money, I probably only paid them and didn't take home anything. But the strategy was, right, this was a bit of a lost leadership. It was an investment in my career so that I could progress. So there will be years where you don't make much money, but you have to kind of be thinking about, you're coming from a financial perspective, your NPV, the cash flow that's to come in the future. And for me, I always had a very clear mindset that, if I invest now and I keep my leg on the career ladder, then eventually, the kids will become independent. I won't need all this care and it'll be fine. So I think the first thing I would say is you have to be really resilient. Yeah. There are going to be family problems all the time when you're working, and you just have to find really creative ways to overcome obstacles. And they'll be like weekly, monthly, they'll be regular, it just becomes a part of life, but it's a short phase of your life. And I think that's the thing that people forget. It feels like mission impossible when you're doing it. But then all of a sudden your kids are grown up, you know? And then the other thing I would say is you just have to be so determined. And I think for me, I just always thought I could achieve anything if I put my mind to it. And so this is just a complete balancing act. It's like juggling 8 balls and not dropping any of them. And I was absolutely determined not to do that, not to drop those balls and to keep going with family and work. But again, you know, I would say the biggest thing about being able to do it is a mindset. And I was lucky. I think I talked about this earlier. I was very lucky because I had a role model. My mother did it and I watched her, right? And she had a huge career as a doctor, which is a very stressful job, you know, and has a lot riding on it. And I watched her. And so she just made me think, you know, she never sort of talked to me about it. She just had such a can-do attitude. And so I for me, I guess the thing that I would say is just convince yourself you can't fail. Don't let yourself fail and just keep going. And that's all you can really do.
Look, Rakhi, thank you for your time today. I mean, your story has been phenomenal to listen to and inspirational, actually. So thank you for sharing your story with us and taking us through your career to date and talking about the trials and tribulations that you've gone through. There's certainly a lot of lessons to take from that. So appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
No, it's a pleasure. And if, you know, hopefully people listen and if it's inspirational and it encourages women to stay in the workplace, then all the better, you know. I think, you know, that it's people inspiring others to sort of continue with their cause. And I always said, you know, for me, my career was a crusade. It was never a job, you know, it was a mission. And it still is.
Thank you for listening to the Barn Partnership Spotlight on podcast. To stay updated with future episodes, subscribe to our channel on the podcast app.